much. Thank you everybody for being here. I would add my voice to Professor Polinsky's in thanking Professor Maria Fernandez for putting this amazing event together, for my colleagues, and for the great opportunity to learn about the work of L'Observatorio, which is, as I think we all agree, it has a great mission, and we are all benefiting in one way or another from what it does for the Spanish language in this country and beyond. My talk is about Spanish in North Africa, which is, as we'll see, shows that the presence has been uninterrupted for many centuries. And although many people tend to think about the contact between Arabic and Spanish as being something of the past, something that took place when the Muslim presence was going on in the Iberian Peninsula, what I will show is the opposite, is that Spanish actually spread to North Africa and it's still being used and spoken today. I'll give a brief socio-historical background, how Spanish got there in the first place, and then I'm going to show some cases of Spanish-Arabic bilingualism in Ceuta and Melilla, and then northern Morocco, the Western Sahara, and northern Algeria. With a little of surprise there, because the work we have on northern Algeria is actually Professor Moreno Fernandez's work. Variation in Spanish in contact with Arabic. I'll talk a little bit about phonology, morphology, and the lexicon. And finally, I will give some perspectives on the future of Spanish in contact with Arabic in North Africa. So early linguistic continuum had previously linked Iberia and North Africa. This doesn't start with Arabic. Even with Punic and with Latin on both sides of the Strait of Gibraltar, they shared many linguistic connections over the centuries. Since 1711, there was for centuries the Arabic connection, but then an example of such contact is the development of Mozarabic as a contact variety between Romance and Arabic. With the end of the Muslim presence in Iberia in 1492, thousands of Sephardic Jews made their way to North Africa, and principally to Morocco and Tunisia. And then between 1609 and 1614, and even before that, about 300,000 Moriscos were expelled from Spain to North Africa. Many of these, they actually were monolingual in Spanish. They didn't speak Arabic anymore. It had been 100 years since they actually, their predecessors spoke Arabic at all. So when they arrived in North Africa, many of them needed translators to be able to function. In her will, Isabel of Spain urged her successors to conquer Africa, que no cesen de la conquista de Africa. That shows the interest that Spain had in North Africa from the beginning. It looks like we tend to think of spread of Spanish and the Spanish Empire immediately beyond the Mediterranean. The truth is there was a lot of efforts to have Spanish presence all across the southern Mediterranean coast. Today we have the Spanish conquered or occupied Melilla in 1497 and later annexed Ceuta from the Portuguese in 1668. Both cities remain part of Spain and they both have the status of ciudad autónoma, and they are on the southern coast of the Mediterranean. While Ceuta is only 24 kilometers away from mainland Spain, Melilla is much further east. In addition to Ceuta and Melilla, Spain still maintains control over 3 other enclaves, but they are principally military, they have military presence as opposed to civil presence. Additionally, Spain established its control over northern Morocco from 1912 to 1956. And 1912 was the year when France and Spain in La Conferencia de Algeciras, they split up Morocco, and Spain had control over the northern part. At its highest point, the Spanish presence in Spanish Morocco consisted of approximately 2,100 people. In 1934, the Spanish occupied Rio de Oro and Smara, which are known today as the Western Sahara. The Sahara was abandoned only in 1975, which, if you think about it, is not really that long ago. In Oran in Algeria, there was a long Spanish presence that lasted from 1510 to 1791. And more importantly, during the French colonization of Algeria, some 150,000 Spaniards were living in Algeria. So Spanish was spoken in a city like Oran. It was one of the most common languages used back then. To give you an idea of the type of or the setting that the presence of the Spanish zone meant for the use of Spanish. This is one of the speakers I interviewed in Tetuan. Tetuan was the capital of the Spanish zone in Spanish Morocco. And she says, mira, cuando mi madre vino aquí, vino en el año 48, ella decía, mira, tú ves como cuando sales ahora y te encuentras un español de vez en cuando, raramente, así se veían los marroquíes, me dice. Mira, lo que es ahora la calle Mohammed V, a la hora del paseo no te podías hacer una idea de la de españoles que había. Claro, soldados a montones, muchachas, hombres, comerciantes de todo tipo, eran españoles todos. El parque lleno de españoles. Si se metía en algún bar, los hay a montones. The idea was that it was half and half, 100,000 military presence, 100,000 civil population, but there were new cities that emerged that were built by Spain, and they were pretty much only Spanish-speaking areas. This is the official map of Spanish Morocco. If you can see, around here is it's the closest part to Spain. I'll show in different picture. I like that map. It's the yes, right, good, thank you. Very good. I like the old map more, but this map is more practical. It shows where thanks Google. It was where Tarifa is, the tip of southern Spain, which you actually can see from the southern part. That's where Ceuta is. Then you see Tangier. Tangier was not part of Spanish Morocco. It was an international city governed by 4 or 5 powers at the same time. It only belonged to Spain during the Second World War, where Franco occupied it for a couple of years. And then you have Tetuan, which was the capital of Spanish Morocco. And then all the way to the other side, you have Melilla. So Melilla is much more isolated from main Spain and much more in contact with the area around it, especially the Berber-speaking areas. Then you have the disputed territories of the Western Sahara, and you see that the Canary Islands are way closer to the Western Sahara than they are to mainland Spain. Finally, the town that we're referring to in northern Algeria, in Oran, is cross from Almeria and Alicante. So in Ceuta, what we have is a city that's about 20 square miles big. It represents the most dynamic case of Spanish-Arabic bilingualism. The population about 70,000, and is divided evenly between the population of peninsular origin, who remains monolingual in Spanish, and the population of Moroccan origin, who vary. Those who are born in Ceuta, they tend to speak, tend to be more dominant in Spanish, and Arabic as a heritage language. But then you have a lot of immigrants who come to the city and they speak both Arabic and Spanish. In many cases, they do also speak Berber as well. The system is monolingual system, so all the children of Moroccan origin have to study in Spanish, which means by the age they get into high school, they are perfectly bilingual in Spanish and Arabic, with the majority of them shifting towards Spanish. In the case of Melilla, it's very similar, a little bit smaller, but the population is more or less the same. In this case, Spanish is in contact more with Berber than it is with Arabic, given the area where it is. And again, the population of peninsular origin tends to remain monolingual, while those who are from Moroccan origin learn Spanish for sure. Some of them maintain Arabic with varying degrees. Now, for northern Morocco, which is the area where Spain had its protectorate, it's the largest area where we have Spanish speakers, because we have about 6 million, many of whom speak Spanish for different reasons, and they have acquired it through different procedures. As in the rest of Morocco, Spanish is not the official, doesn't have official status. French does. French is the second official language. Spanish does not. And part of that is, as I will show in a minute, is even though Spanish gained momentum with the establishment of the protectorate, Spain's colonial language policies failed to root its language in the native population as France did. What Spain did, which was from the understanding of the population is that they divided their schools in 3 different parts. They had Las Escuelas Españolas, which was for the European, Las Escuelas Hispano-Israelitas, which was for the Jewish population, and Las Escuelas Hispano-Musulmanas, which was for the local population. The purpose was to endow Morocco with good peasants, which didn't work well for the post-colonial period. France did the opposite. They chose the elite from the local population, and they had schools that they called les écoles de notables. When the independence came, these people, they wanted to have French as second language, and they imposed it on the rest of the country. So speakers of Spanish in northern Morocco can be divided into groups. We have the native speakers of Spanish. These are the few remaining Spanish immigrants and second and third generation immigrants who conserve language, nationality, religion, and other identity indices. So some of them have never been to Spain, yet they are Spanish. They speak Spanish as native speakers. It's a wonderful, I was talking with Professor Polensky, it's a wonderful case of heritage language maintenance. And also all other type of identity markers. In this case, this is a speaker from Tetuán. She says, yo soy nacida aquí, criada aquí, además he salido poquísimo, y te lo juro, yo de aquí no me siento. Yo digo, soy tetuaní, soy de Tetuán. That's a very interesting thing about Spanish speakers in northern Morocco is that they wouldn't say, yo soy marroquí, I'm Moroccan. They say, yo soy español, but they say, yo soy tetuaní, or soy tangerino. They identify with the city. They don't identify with the whole country. For them, they feel Tetuani before anything else. At the same time, they feel Spanish. Ten cuidado que vivimos en un círculo muy pequeño, vivimos aparte. Yo, por ejemplo, no tengo costumbre musulmana ninguna. La comida sí, me gusta, pero me está gustando ahora. Porque en mi casa siempre, and this is where the explanation for the strong ethno-linguistic vitality that Spanish shows in North Africa. Porque siempre se ha cocinado al estilo español, se habla español y se vive el culto religioso que es que somos católicos todos. That explains a lot why Spanish is maintained at such a successful rate among second and third generation Spanish speakers who have never been to Spain, some of them. The other side are the non-native speakers, and these are Moroccan speakers of Spanish who have learned the language either through formal instruction. Spanish is offered in about 42% of Moroccan high schools, so it's very popular as second language, third language, even though French is required. And Spain maintains 11 educational centers with 293 teachers. Many of these majority come from the peninsula, but many of them come from areas that's outside Andalusia, which will explain the presence of some features there. 81% of the speakers, of the students in these schools are Moroccan, and that shows the interest that the local population has in Spanish. So the schools are catering primarily to Moroccan students. In the case of naturalistic acquisition of Spanish, through intense exposure to Spanish media and interaction with Spanish speakers living in the area, some Moroccans have also developed an advanced competence. We have people who haven't taken any class in Spanish yet. They're competent and they can have a conversation in Spanish. Both of these people that I interviewed didn't really take any formal classes, but they had a lot of experience with the languages. In the first case, you have an example where identity is marked as he speaks Arabic, he feels he's Moroccan, there is no doubt about that, but then el español es mi segundo idioma. There's this attachment to Spanish because they belong to the northern part of Morocco, where they feel Spanish distinguishes them from the rest of Morocco, where they speak French. He says that for him, Spanish is the second language, even though he didn't study Spanish really, he studied French at school. But that identity is because he lives in an area, which is Tangier, where Spanish has a major presence. The second case is again somebody who says, si vas a un café o algo así, ves que la gente ve la televisión española, más que la televisión marroquí. Yo en mi casa la mayoría del tiempo veo solamente la televisión española, solamente, veo muchos programas, etc. And it may be surprising how can somebody pick up language just by TV. The truth is they do it because they grew up from early age watching Spanish TV, interacting. Any opportunities for them to interact with a Spanish speaker, they jump on it. They're eager to practice their Spanish. And with that, there is this dedication, this motivation to acquire and develop competence in language that shows in the interviews. In the Spanish Sahara, this is just a quick note, the because the population was smaller, they only had one system, one type of schooling, and it was in Spanish. So the Sahrawis did go through school that only taught in Spanish, and then when the dispute started, the Sahrawis opted to have Spanish as their second language, so they don't have French. And in the camps in Algeria, where they have about 200,000 people, they teach Spanish as a second language. So Arabic is the official language, standard Arabic, but then Spanish is their language, with a lot of help from Spain, but also from Cuba, which is quite interesting. In the case of Oran, which is the city I pointed in Algeria, Moreno Fernandez research on vestige Spanish in Oran constitutes the only database study we have from this context. He found that competence in Spanish is limited to aging speakers who lived along Spanish speakers under French colonialism and whose number is rapidly decreasing. So there is a little bit, the shift is way faster in Algeria because the speakers are not being replaced with new speakers acquired in a natural context. They have to study it in Instituto Cervantes or they have to study it somewhere else. Now, with variation in Spanish in contact with Arabic, how does the Spanish that the native speakers who live in northern Morocco look like? It looks very similar to Andalusian variety. We looked at Spanish in North Africa, be it in northern Morocco, Ceuta or Melilla. It's very similar. I have a speaker here who is second generation. He was in his late 70s. He's been to Spain very, very little, maybe 2 or 3 times in trips organized from Morocco. And he says, los españoles de aquí hablan el español lo mismo que en cualquier sitio de Andalucía. Yo soy nacido aquí, y vienen muchas familias de España, me escuchan hablar y me dicen de qué parte de España soy. Yo nací en España, nací aquí. And that's really big thing for them, is that I am Spanish, I keep competence as native speaker, even though I have lived very few days in Spain itself. At the phonological level, the informants interviewed in Tangier and Tetuan showed more tendency towards Seseo. They speak much more similar to what we have in Andalusia, but also there are other features that we find, such as the behavior of final S. The majority, 87%, they weaken or would drop final S. And also we have cases such as the weakening of word final D, especially in past participle. We have angiismo and the velarization of final N, and aspiration of the velar, the affrication of the affricate. All these, we find them in Andalusia, and we do find them in northern Morocco among the native speakers. Several of these features, you can, excuse me, you can see them right here. You will notice them in this excerpt where he shows several of these variations.
La vivienda la perdieron en los papeles, pero no en hecho. En hecho la vivienda está ahí. Pero resulta que una de las dueñas que compró el lote de terreno.
And this person lived all his life in Morocco as well. At the lexical level, there are a few words that we find from Arabic. We have some interjections. We have some borrowings. Many of these borrowings, I'm going to drink some water. Excuse me. It's not really that significant, but we have several cases that are, some of them are present in the dictionary of La Real Academia, such as Kabila or Kif or Hashish. And the interesting thing is that in La Real Academia, they do recognize that these words, they come from Moroccan Arabic, not from standard Arabic. So these words are different from the words that came into Spanish from Hispanic Arabic, the Arabic variety that was spoken in Spain. This is a result of the contact between Spanish and Arabic in North Africa. But so far, and given such a limited inventory of lexical borrowing, no morphosyntactic variation in native North African Spanish has been identified as a result of contact with Arabic. So we really can't say Spanish spoken by native speakers in northern Morocco is different because of contact with Arabic. We don't have any proof of that because partly they remain monolingual in Spanish. Some of them, those who lived in the French zone, so there were many Spanish speakers who lived in northern Morocco, but some of them lived in the French zone. Those who lived in the French zone, such as in Casablanca, they did develop competence in French, and in some cases, after the French left, they had to develop subcompetence in Spanish, in Arabic. So you see here, the part that's in red, it's in Arabic. The part that's in green, it's in Spanish. And the part that's in blue is in French. And this is the same speaker in the same sentence.
الوالد جوج هنا في كازا جوج جا صغار جا مع والدي.
Donc il a appris,
Tenía mi padre cuando vino con su padre.
y aprendió.
Il travaille rien que la carrière. خدامين غير في الأحجار. Des types de carrières. Il travaillait dans les carrières.
You can see that I had problem deciding which language to speak to him because he kept moving from one to another. In the case of bilingual speakers, it's different because we do have a lot of variation from standard Spanish, and that has to do with them being dominant in Arabic. The most common feature is the instability of the vowel system. Arabic has only 3 vowels, Spanish has 5, which leads to the fact that the A can become E, and the O can become U, so the mid vowels can become the high vowels, or the other way around. So for Moroccan speaker, tangerino or tangerino sound the same. Why? Because the A and the E in Arabic, they are not phonemic. We find also cases where the initial vowel is deleted. So we have a word like esponja, it becomes sponja. That also has an explanation in Moroccan Arabic, which has a preference for initial complex consonant clusters. And in some cases, we do have shortening of vowel, as Spanish doesn't do that, doesn't change a vowel to schwa. In Moroccan Spanish, schwa exists. In Moroccan Arabic, schwa exists. And when they speak Spanish, they tend to shorten some of the vowels and produce it with schwa, similar to what some of our students in the US do sometimes. There's also diphthong reduction in many cases, so we end up having 1 vowel instead of the 2. Same, the older speakers in northern Morocco, they tend to have more seseo, even though the younger generation, they tend to have more usage of the theta, of the alternancia, and the distinción. That has to do a lot with schooling, because the Spanish institutions that are present in North Africa, many of them bring teachers from areas where they speak with la distinción. So they pass that on to the students. The older generation who learned it from their neighbors who were Spanish, or some of them served in Spanish military, they use pretty much the seseo as the rule. The S in post-nuclear position, in the majority, there's a general agreement that aspiration is not a common behavior in any of the areas. In Oran, Moreno Fernandez found that the majority of the cases were either of maintenance or deletion. And for younger educated Moroccan speakers, they tend to maintain the final S. So the older speaker who learned it from Spanish speakers, who learned it from the native, who themselves, they delete it, they would delete it. The new generation who are learning it through TV or through school, they tend to keep the S, and they speak with, in some cases, even strengthened S. Of course, they have diismo, and although in many cases they weaken la yod, la velar can be stronger than it is in Andalusia, and that also has to do with the new type of variety they are exposed to. An interesting thing is, unlike other Arabic speakers who don't have the P sound doesn't exist in Arabic. So sometimes when the original word is in P, they tend to voice it to be B. So park could be bark, right? But in northern Morocco, that doesn't happen. Not only they don't use the B instead of the P, there are even cases of hypercorrection where the word that's borrowed and used even by monolingual speaker contains a P instead of the original B. So we have words like poligrafo instead of bolígrafo. And this can be somebody who doesn't know Spanish, but that's the word they use for bolígrafo, or bocadillo instead of bocadillo, which is a very interesting case. The most challenging sound for North Africans when they speak Spanish is the palatal nasal. They tend to decompose it. So it becomes an apical-alveolar nasal plus a palatal glide. So instead of, it becomes Hispania. They become 2 sounds. In some cases, there are speakers who reduce the trill to a tap. And at the suprasegmental level, with vowel reduction, stress may shift to the penultimate syllable. And this could be explained by the fact that in Moroccan Arabic, stress falls in the penultimate syllable if the final syllable is not a heavy one. This is an example of a Moroccan speaker speaking Arabic, and you can see many of the features that I mentioned, like vowel shortening, strong S's. Right here.
Las Naciones Unidas dicen que cada persona tiene derecho a determinar su propio destino, como ella quiera. Pero si eres marroquí, no puedes determinar tu destino en España, porque no eres español, no es tu territorio.
So there is this this situation where, politically speaking, they feel very Moroccan. In any confrontation with Spain, they feel very Moroccan. But then Spanish is their language. They love the language. They wanna keep it. It's a very interesting situation. In case of morphosyntax, I'm going to be brief here, not to go over my time. The several cases that we have are typical of the acquisition of Spanish as a second language, the verb morphology, etc. In many cases, we find these not only in Arabic speakers learning Spanish, but in other cases as well of students of Spanish in general. What's interesting for us is that all of the morphosyntactic features that have been identified in Spanish-Arabic bilingualism studies should be attributed to varying degrees of competence in Spanish. They make this type of variation not because there is this new variety called North African Spanish. It's because that's how they are acquiring and learning the language, and they make errors as any second language learners can make. So the point I'm making is that we can't speak of a stable North African Spanish variety developed by Moroccan speakers. They're second language learners. Their target variety is Peninsular Spanish, while the native speakers of Spanish who are in the area, they are really, you cannot distinguish them from Andalusian speakers. In the vocabulary, there are many cases where they speak Spanish, where they use some words from Arabic. An interesting case is what Moreno Fernandez has shown in Oran, where you can have French interference in cases of Arabic-French bilinguals. So you have patisseria instead of pasteleria, or you have carrotas instead of zanahorias. If we turn and look at the other way, what is interesting is that Spanish has affected Arabic at a significant degree at the lexical level. So Northern Moroccan Spanish has about 2,000 loan words from Spanish. These are not technical, these are not very specialized words. Words such as playa, they use it in Spanish. Words like camarero, they would use it in Spanish. Words like cocina would be used in Spanish. So there is a huge list of words that entered Moroccan Arabic, Northern Moroccan Arabic, since the protectorate, and it continues until now. There are also cases where, because they're competent in French as well, they will switch between Spanish and French, as you see in the first example, or they will switch between Spanish and Arabic in the first one, and then Spanish and French in the second example. So to conclude, Spanish-Arabic contact was never totally interrupted since it started. We always had speakers of Spanish. In the case of Judeoic Spanish, which is the variety that was maintained until the beginning of the 20th century by the Jewish population in northern Morocco, with contact with the Spanish, it was re-Hispanized. Many of the features that used to distinguish Judeo Spanish from standard Spanish, from modern Spanish, were lost as schooling started with teachers brought from Spain. With the immigration that happened after the independence of Morocco in 1956, right now the number of possible speakers of Hakitia, which is the local variety of Judeo Spanish, is around 100. So it's not what it used to be. The major outcome of contact between Spanish and Arabic in recent times is the partly Hispanic nature of northern Morocco, extensive Spanish-Arabic bilingualism in Ceuta and Melilla, Berber in Melilla, and the increasing status of Arabic as a heritage language in Spain. With interest in immigration and the role of Ceuta and Melilla and the economic presence that Spain has in northern Morocco. A company like Telefonica, for example, they operate a call center from Tangier. So somebody in Madrid who wants to buy movie ticket or who wants to buy a theater ticket actually is calling to Tangier to get that ticket bought. And there are many more companies that are starting to do business in northern Morocco because they have a population that speak the language and it's across the strait. The cost of bringing it from China may be much more expensive than doing it in Morocco. Bilingual speakers present features that characterize second language learner, and the prestige of peninsular variety makes it the target variety and limits the possibilities for the development of a North African dialect of Spanish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just really curious what this feels like on the ground. If I go to Tangier as somebody who doesn't speak French, somebody who doesn't speak Arabic, but somebody who speaks Spanish and English, am I likely to find just by going to a store and interlocutor who speaks Spanish? Am I more likely to find people who speak English? What does it feel like on the ground?
It would be Spanish in the first place. So you wouldn't have any problem in Tangier speaking Spanish. In not only stores are in Morocco, they speak many languages. But if you stop a person in the street, you have very good chances of being able to communicate with them in Spanish. Even if their level may vary depending on their experience with the language and their personal history. But there are many Moroccans who are born in Spain. They move back to Tangier or move back to northern Morocco. There are people who grow up studying in Spanish schools because they want to study in Spain for their college degree. There are people who have experience with the language from every single for me, I speak a different dialect. I'm from Tunisia. So even though I speak Arabic, they know the accent, and I find no problem speaking to them in Spanish, as opposed to both of us trying to converge to speak some type of Arabic variety. I understand their variety, they understand mine. For some reason, Spanish or French may seem like natural choice too. So yeah, with Spanish, you'll be fine. In addition, there are Spanish speakers still around. I mean, native Spanish speakers around.
No, I was just thinking in terms of what you were saying, the prestige priority from Spain, right? If you go from Latin America, would they recognize your accent? I would assume. Is there any difference in response?
They're aware of the differences, the same way they're aware of the difference between central northern dialect of Spanish and Andalusian Spanish. Their preference is much more for the central northern dialect, but they won't have a negative attitude. It's the language. They have very positive attitude towards Spanish regardless. But themselves, they see themselves, the younger generation, speaking with vosotros, speaking with the theta. They identify more with what the media is projecting and what their teachers who came sometimes from Galicia are using in the classroom. But you won't have a negative attitude toward specific or stigmatization towards specific variety of Spanish.
And I assume that migration is very limited from Latin America to Morocco.
There are very few cases of people who take Morocco as maybe the first step to get into Spain and they get trapped there. So in Tangier, there is very small community, but it's transitional community. You don't have stable Latin American community.
Thank you.
The same way you have a Spanish one, which is. I mean, right now we speak about 3,000 Spaniards in northern Morocco, but it varies in different ways.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Europe, and our next.
Sorry, I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that there are Spanish companies like Telefónica and others established there, working there. Do you have information, data on how the increase of presence of Spanish companies in Morocco have influenced the number of people who nowadays, in respect to the last 15 years, have gone into learning Spanish and in relation with French, for instance?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question. Yes, from the numbers from the Instituto Cervantes, actually we can see that there is more increase and more demand for Spanish, for classes in Spanish. And then there are these schools that open over the last 10 or 15 years to teach Spanish because there is demand. Because Telefonica doesn't hire one or two, they hire dozens of people all of a sudden. And so yes, there is this awareness, which has been there for a long time, that if you know Spanish, you probably have a better chance of either studying, migrating, or even working for a Spanish company in North Africa. The other thing is that there is the effect of Ceuta and Melilla. People travel, like people from Tetuan, they have the right to go to Tetuan for 24 hours without visa. We have hundreds of people who cross every day, back and forth. Now, French is the official second language. So what do? They can't ignore French. If they ignore French, it means they can't go to college because the majority of these classes are in French. So if somebody from Tangier wants to study medicine, they have two choices. If they went to a Spanish school, they have to go to Spain, and they tend to go to Granada. And even La UNED has some connection there. If they wanted to study in Morocco, they have to learn French. So many of them learn French as any other Moroccan, but at the same time they develop competence in Spanish, looking forward to the economic possibilities that the Spanish companies are bringing with them.